By the end of this video, you're gonna know exactly how to start your Airbnb business from total scratch without any experience all the way to 6 or 7 figures into 2026. My name is Almahdi. I've done several $100,000s on Airbnb and have a multiple 7-figure Airbnb portfolio. And in this training, I'm gonna break down the exact process that I followed to build up to this point. How to identify properties, how to identify a great market, how to use AirDNA, how to automate your entire business so that you're not the one always working in the business, but building that semi-passive income. So make sure you pull out your pen and paper, take a bunch of notes because we're going to go in detail. Be great. What's up, guys? My name is Almahdi. I'm a 7-figure Airbnb superhost, and this is going to be a complete A to Z, step-by-step Airbnb masterclass training where I'm going to teach you how to go from 0 to over 6 figures on Airbnb with or without owning a property. And what I'm specifically going to focus on is Airbnb rental arbitrage and how to buy a property for a rate at 3 to 5%. Okay, so yes, that's still possible. That's exactly how I've been buying Airbnb properties, and that's what you can do as well. So make sure you've got your notepad ready. We're going to do a complete deep dive, and I'm going to pour out everything that I know on how you can succeed with Airbnb, because the game has completely changed this year and into the future. So let's get right into it. Number one is market research. Okay, this is going to be the most important step when you're starting, because right now in 2025, regulations have changed. Where you can't do Airbnb has completely changed. And this is also going to help you figure out right from the get-go how profitable your Airbnb is going to be. So what I try to typically start out with for students is make sure, if you can, starting with an area around you within 2-3 hour drive maximum. It's not required. You absolutely can go out of state when you start out. But as a beginner, it's much easier if you're a little more familiar with the area and you can get to the property to get your hands kind of dirty before you start going out and scaling in different cities and honestly even different countries, right? Once you get the formula down and you understand what you're doing, you can then go out and scale. So how do we do our market research? So 2 primary methods, and you're going to use a combination of both of them. Number 1, funny enough, is just going to be Airbnb.com. And number 2, which is extremely important, is AirDNA.co. So what do I mean by Airbnb.com? Once you figure out what cities or towns, you can actually type in the name of the city or a particular area that you're in or looking to do Airbnb, and Airbnb will actually tell you what those rules and regulations are legally from their actual website. So that's a good place to start. Obviously, there's Google, but then there's also AirDNA when it comes to figuring out occupancy and all these different metrics, revenue, how much properties are grossing in that area on Airbnb or VRBO. And this is going to be one of your most important tools that you use. So what are we looking for when we go to AirDNA.co? Once you've figured out generally what cities you want to start looking at, so let's pick, I don't know, Washington, D.C. or Miami, any one of these cities. When you plug in that city into AirDNA, it's going to give you all sorts of metrics, okay? The 2 most important metrics that I like to look at initially are the average daily rate. Average daily rate. Now, what's this going to tell you? The average daily rate is the price per night that the average Airbnb in that area goes for. So when I'm working with people in any property that I look at, now the numbers are a little bit different as I continue to scale out. But especially starting out and depending on how much capital you have, you want to look at anything above about $150 to $200 per night daily rate. Why? Anything, in my opinion, that is lower than this is just, it's not going to be so easy to be profitable. So if you can find an area where they're charging 150, 200 on average per night for those Airbnbs, or even higher, then you have some more meat on the bone where once you put that property up for rent on the platforms, you'll be able to make profit after your expenses. Number two, that was number one, right? Number two is the occupancy rate. So how occupied generally are those properties in that area? And the number here, you want to look and focus on areas that have at least a 70% or greater occupancy rate. Okay? And that helps you understand that there's a very healthy demand and properties are being booked. So keep these two, number one and number two, metrics in mind when you're on AirDNA. Okay? So you just plug in that website and you can look it up. There's a free version and then there's also a paid version. So you want to start out looking at AirDNA when it comes to actually doing that deeper research. Now, another thing AirDNA is going to give you, you can type in an address and whatever properties that you're looking at, it's going to give you an estimate on how much gross revenue that property will bring in on an annual basis. And they're able to do that by scraping certain data. So while it's not always extremely accurate, it'll give you the ballpark that you need for you to make an informed decision. And it does get pretty close. So it's quite a reliable resource and you absolutely need to use this when you're doing your homework. So again, more for, legal and compliance as far as what you require for legality of Airbnb in a particular area. Airbnb is a great place to start. Also use Google, use ChatGPT, where you can type in, what are the regulations for Airbnb in XYZ city or town? And it's going to give you everything. So typically, you might need a license, you might need a permit, or if Airbnb is not allowed, then you'll know and you'll move on to the next place. Another thing to keep in mind when you're doing your research is HOAs. I like to focus on single family homes because in my experience, they've yielded a greater profit. So, and you need less of them. You can make a very healthy income just on 1, 2, 3 properties, 4 or 5 properties. You don't need to have so many doors, each scraping by with like very small margins. You don't need to do that. So if you have a select few properties, you can make a very healthy income doing that. All right. So yeah, focus on, for Airbnb.com, it's good to figure out those initial regulations, and AirDNA is going to give you the metrics around different properties. You can plug in the properties that you're looking at, see what they would gross. And then also, these are the two kind of key metrics. AirDNA, by the way, gives you a lot of data points. These are the two crucial ones that you want to look at when you're doing that research. Now, aside from regulations and compliance and all of that, once you've found the city or town and now you're just looking for properties, so what are the characteristics of a property that you want that's going to win? Well, I'll tell you this right now, and we're going to get into it deeper into the training, but the number one most important aspect of Airbnb in 2025, because the game has completely changed, is your amenities. Amenities are crucial. So what do I mean by amenities? Pretty much things to do at the house. So number one, for example, a pool. Okay? And not in any particular order, but these are just some general amenities that tend to do well. A spa. What's really big now is there's also saunas, a pickleball court, or basketball court. Now, look, I know some of these sound pretty extreme, okay? But this is what's going to help you absolutely dominate. Now, you don't need these. I'm just giving you some really, really good ones so that if you do come across a property or you're buying a property, if you can install these amenities, you're going to be so well booked because you're going to stand out from your competition. And that's how you win in 2025. So game rooms, do over here. A game room, mini movie theater room. Okay. So here's how Airbnb has changed in this year. You can no longer just throw up a property and scrape by, barely put any furniture, and just have a bare bones property. It's not going to do well. All right, I'll just tell you that right now. I'll save you the time. I'll save you the money. But if you're able to incorporate these elements and execute on the remaining steps that I share in this training, you're going to do very, very well. And Airbnb is alive and well. And my students are proving it. My properties are proving it. This is just going to be what you need to focus on, is implementing amenities like this that stick out. All right. So as you're looking for properties, if they already have these, so typically like a pool and a spa, a lot of properties at a particular level or a neighborhood, especially if you're in a warmer area or people travel to your city or town or destination in the summer or any time of year, really, a pool and a spa is pretty, you're pretty well positioned to do quite well. And then you can add saunas or a pickleball court or basketball court. So for example, I added a pickleball court to one of my properties few months back, about six months or so back, and it absolutely helped me crush. Right after that, I was getting more bookings, and people were booking my property just because of the pickleball court, leaving those comments in the reviews and messaging me during the inquiries and literally saying, hey, we're literally getting this property because we love pickleball. We're coming to play pickleball. So just an example of how important your amenities are. So the more amenities you can stack, this is the key. I can't emphasize this enough. If you're going to get into Airbnb, the more amenities you can stack, whether your property comes with those or you can see the area where you can convert a room into a movie theater room or anything like that, or a garage. A great way to convert a garage and make it useful is turning the garage into a game room. These are exactly how you're going to dominate and actually make money and be very profitable on Airbnb in 2025. This is going to be one of the most, if not the most important training that you watch if you're starting an Airbnb business in 2025 going into 2026. What I'm going to show you is exactly how to do market and property research to find profitable properties and be able to stay away from properties that are not worth your time or money from an investment standpoint, which is crucial because this is the single most important skill any host or aspiring host can learn and develop for making or breaking their business. That literally will come down to the type of properties that you get. So make sure to pull out your pen and paper and take a bunch of notes. I'm going to walk you through my exact process and the process that I teach everyone that I work with on identifying properties through a tool called AirDNA.co, which we're going to get into. And then like what you're seeing here, Zillow, Realtor.com, many other websites that list properties that are for sale and for rent. So whether you're doing Airbnb arbitrage or you're looking to purchase a property, this exact process applies to you. And without further ado, let's jump right in. So what you're seeing here is Zillow. This is where we find properties that are for sale or for rent. So you're gonna go to Zillow.com, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick a random city and state. So let's go with, Alabama. Let's say Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama. Okay. And I'm going to walk you through the entire process. This process can get very, very extensive. So I'm going to give you the very good level of detail, but just keep in mind that this can go for hours, honestly, because especially if you're looking to purchase a property, you want to vet all of the different factors when you're looking at a good investment versus one that you want to skip over. So before you even get to this point, by the way, I do want to take a step back and say, before you pick a city or a town, run your city through or your county through ChatGPT to make sure short-term rentals are allowed so that you don't waste your time researching areas that don't allow short-term rentals or are not short-term rental friendly. So very, very important. Make sure you do that before you get into a property or even start your research. So assuming you've done that, let's take a look at what we've got in Birmingham. So I'm going to zoom in here, and what we're also then going to do is pull up AirDNA.co, which is the tool that I use to do research, and it provides all sorts of data around properties and markets, cities, towns, even countries. And I'm going to pull it up in just a moment here. These are the different plans which we'll go over, but it gives you a bunch of different metrics on, annual revenue, nightly rates, occupancy rates, all of that sort of information that you need to make an informed decision for your investment. So I want to just pull up the plans here. So a lot of people ask me, which plan do you need? So I'm going to go over them. There's the free version, which is honestly quite limited. And, if you're a complete beginner and you want to just kind of start taking a look at what AirDNA has to offer, you can start out with that free version, but it's really not going to give you the information, metrics, and data that you need when you're actually going to pull the trigger on getting a property. Because look, you're building a business, right? And you're going to be spending thousands, tens of thousands, and if you're purchasing property, hundreds of thousands of dollars buying and investing into your property and business. So, spending a couple bucks on having the right tools is crucial and essential. I would not skip out on that. This is the research tier, which, as I say, is the most popular. It's 34 bucks a month if you purchase it annually. It's 125 bucks if you go month to month. So this is the tier that most people get, and it provides you honestly with everything that you need to get into Airbnb. So I would use the research tier if you're starting out. They also have the host tier. It's got some additional, bells and whistles to it, but honestly, my personal opinion, you only need the research tier to get all the information that you need to get into your property. I am an affiliate, so if you want to get a 10% discount from your membership, I'm going to leave the link in the description of this video. Feel free to click on that and get 10% off of your membership for AirDNA, which honestly you'll need anyway if you're getting into this business. So I would go ahead and do that. Enough with that. Now let's go back to Birmingham here. So what I want you to do once you select that city or state, we're going to go over here to overview, and what you can do is just type in the city, Alabama. So you can type in Birmingham, any location, and you want to select the one that's under short-term rentals. They give you a bunch of different categories, properties for sale, etc. All you need to look at is under the short-term rental market. And I want to point you to, like I mentioned, the different metrics that they provide. So you're going to see a overall market score here, 90, an annual revenue. So this is average annual revenue of all these properties, occupancy rate, average daily rate. So all of that information is what you're able to see, which again, extremely important when you're evaluating a market. So let's say we're moving forward with this market here, and there's a couple very, very important filters I'm going to show you how to apply when you're using AirDNA, because AirDNA has a bunch of data on so many properties. You only want to focus on properties and compare them to those that are full-time hosts and properties that are basically listed on a year-round basis, not just people that have thrown an Airbnb up for 1, 2, or 3 months. Because what AirDNA does is it takes, let's say someone posted a property for 3 months, it's going to give you an estimate on an annual basis based on only the 3 months, which could not be indicative of reality in how the property would have done the other 9 months. They take those 3 months and then they extrapolate that data and they kind of make an assumption on how the property would perform based on the only 3 months that it was listed, which isn't as accurate as we want it to be, because those 3 months could have been the best 3 months of the year, and maybe the rest of the year doesn't perform that well. So in other words, we're going to put some filters on once we get to that step, where we're going to refine the data only to full-time properties. Okay. So what I want you to do once you type in your city, we're going to go down here to top short-term rentals, and you're going to click view all. And what that's going to do, you'll see all these purple dots here. Those are all short-term rentals, and you'll see them here as well, listed about the top. And you want to take this filter up here on the top right and sort it by revenue. So what that's going to do is it's going to put the highest grossing properties, pulling in the most revenue at the top, and it's going to descend in descending order. So you're going to be able to see all of these numbers here. So for instance, it's going to give you revenue potential for all the properties and the number of days they're available, and then the actual revenue they've generated, occupancy and daily rate. So these are the most important metrics to us. One thing I like to do if I'm looking at a market overall is, once I zoom in here a little bit, I like to hover over and see if I can find some initial trends. For example, if I'm moving my mouse and all of these are in a certain area, which are the best performers, I'm going to zoom in on those particular areas. So it's a bit all over the place right now, but there's quite a few that are kind of in the center of Birmingham. So I'm going to zoom in just a bit here. And what I like to do, if you've worked with me, you know this, my strategy and what 2025 into 2026 has shown is you want to focus, in my opinion, you can do Airbnb, by the way, on apartments and townhomes and all of that, but the higher profit and higher grossing properties are typically those larger properties that we can really fill up with amenities. So you'll notice here, a lot of the properties are pretty nice. They're large. They've got, ping pong, they got big backyards, and that is the market that we're going to try to fit in. Okay. So we're going to zoom in a little bit and narrow this down and see what we can do. So we can see some 5 bedrooms here. And I want you to focus, by the way, on the process, how I'm looking at this, what I'm looking at and what I'm pointing out. Just keep that in mind, the process of how we identify and what I'm looking out for. And we're going to get in a little bit more detail, of course. So let's say I zoom in on these areas where there's 4 or 5 bedroom properties. They're doing about, let's see, we've got a lot of properties doing 149, 7 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms. The 5 bedroom properties are doing about 130, 113, 109, 5 beds. Yeah, so what we're gonna do is I'm going to filter Zillow for 5 bedroom plus properties, okay? Because these are pretty, we're not going to touch the pricing. These are somewhat decently priced properties. I'm seeing 400K, 500K, 600K. So let's take a look at only houses. Like I mentioned, you're going to take property type and filter it down in this case. And again, you can do apartments. I like to stick with single family houses for the profitability and the revenue, right? So I'm going to hit apply there. And let's just scroll around here a little bit. 5 bedrooms only. The prices are a bit all over the place, honestly. 5 bed properties. Okay, so we've got some 900K. Wow, 250 to 950. It varies quite a bit. Let's try to stick in the middle, kind of that middle ground. So here's one for 675. Can look at that. Looks pretty nice. Yeah, why not? Let's just go with this one. Let's take a look at this one. So this one is 675,000. Now, what I'm also going to do is take this address and then I'm going to drop it in to the search, and you can literally pinpoint a certain property and it's going to give you a projection. Okay, so keep in mind, this is just a projection, guys. All right, so it's down here in the black dot. So there's a few properties surrounding it, and this property is a 5 bedroom, 3 bathroom. It looks nice. Now what we need to do is, again, we're only going to filter for full-time properties. So how do you do that? When I go back to the overview tab here, I'm going to go to listing, and our property, this is very important, is a 5 bedroom. So you need to filter only for those 5 bedrooms, because the whole point of what we're doing now is we are going to look up properties. We're looking up this property that we found that we might want to move forward with, and we're going to see if we can find properties that compare to it that are already short-term rentals and how they're performing. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to come over to, we're going to stick to Birmingham. We're going to open this all up, and I'm going to filter for, since this property is our property is a 5 bedroom, we're going to filter for 5 bedrooms because we want to see how 5 bedroom properties do. And then for the bathrooms as well, we're going to cap it out at 3 bathrooms. Listing type, entire place, because that's what the property would be. And we're going to click apply. Now, how do we filter only for full-time properties? Very important. That's where you go over here to performance, and you're going to scroll down to host unit count is just the number of properties. We don't care about that. Number of properties that the hosts have. Days available. This is extremely important. So you're going to uncheck everything except 271 to 365. That gives us the properties that are listed for a majority of the year. Okay. Rating, we don't care about that. Review count, extremely important. So we want to, again, only filter out for properties that have been around for a longer period of time. They're full-time properties. So we're going to only select 20, 50, 100, or 200 plus, these ranges. You can also, depending on how many properties you see, sometimes you can keep the 11 through 19 because maybe that host, they have a full-time property, but maybe they're just not good at following up with their guests. For the review side, they don't have a sequence to do that. But for now, let's just keep only these that are typically full-time properties. And then you're going to just hit apply. And what you're going to notice is the metrics have changed. So 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and now you're seeing the annual revenue numbers are much higher. Okay. So we're going to take our address and put it right into the rentalizer and hit search. And what this is going to do is actually find this property specifically and give us a projection. So when you do this, make sure, okay, so it's projecting about 108,000, but you always need to check the number of bedrooms and bathrooms because sometimes AirDNA doesn't have that by default. So this is a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom. So we're going to update this to a 5-bed and 3-bath and click update. And by the way, you also want to update the number of guests. Okay. So we're going to come down here. Typically, from a regulation perspective, many counties make it so that 2 adults can stay in a bedroom. So 2 times 5 is 10, plus they allow for a couple children. This is, again, generally. You can look on Google or the city, and they're going to have those details on occupancy. So we're going to mark, let's say, 12 guests and hit update. And now it's saying that this property would likely generate 155,000. But we don't want to only look at that. We want to do our own analysis. So when I zoom in here, look at this. You're going to see other properties that are 5 beds. Now they're a little bit further. So I want you, again, think about how I'm processing this. You typically want to look at whether there's an HOA, by the way. Maybe that's the reason there aren't specific properties in this neighborhood. Maybe there's an HOA. HOAs sometimes restrict if you can do shorter term rentals or not. You want to keep all these things in mind. And I'm giving you just, off the top of my mind, the high level things. But when I work with people one-on-one, my students know we go very, very deep with the analysis. Okay. So we are going to look at the comps. Let's find properties that look similar in how they're performing. So one of the things that we want to make sure from the numbers side is, firstly, just again, very high level math we're going to do here at what our general break even would be if we were to purchase this property. So if this house is $675,000, we're going to have a mortgage on it. We're going to have expenses, utilities, cost of operating the property. So what I like to do is go to Bankrate Mortgage Calculator, and it's going to tell us roughly how much it's going to cost to put money down into the property, what the mortgage is going to be. Okay. Because that's going to give us our expenses, property tax, insurance, all of that. So I want to emphasize this, by the way. This calculator, of course, is going off of, this 20%. There are ways, if you do creative finance and seller finance with sellers, you can negotiate rates, pricing, and terms. But again, I'm going to put that aside. I'll do a different training on that. And we're going to just pretend you're going to the bank, which is the standard way most people purchase the property. They have to put about 20% down. So we're going to plug in 675 here. And okay, so 20% down. Interest rate, let's just call it 6.5 right now. What's the zip code? 35226. 35226. And then we're going to scroll down and hit update. Okay, so $3,900. roughly, is what it's projecting. 39 is your mortgage. But then there's going to be roughly, let's say 1,000 in expenses on utilities, and then another 1K on miscellaneous expenses, maybe some repairs, CapEx essentially, right? So let's add another 2,000. So let's call it 3,900 plus 2,000 is 5,900 times 12. You're looking at $70,800 for this property, just to keep things running smoothly. Okay, so that's the number you want to keep in your mind. So when we look at AirDNA, this is high level, right? When you are doing an analysis, you want to look at several properties, and I also have a profitability calculator, which I work with my students, and we plug in all the expenses that you can imagine, all of the utilities, property taxes, CapEx, cleaning fees, management fees, all of that stuff is going to go in. But again, I'm giving you the high level, just an estimate, another $2,000 a month in expenses. Okay. So any property, if we're seeing properties that are doing above 70,000, like for instance, let's look at this one comp. It's got 5 bedrooms. Let's see how similar it is. That's the next thing we do here. So this one, apparently, when we click, is doing 148,000 per year. So the next thing we want to do is see how similar it is as a property. So we have the number of bedrooms right, number of bathrooms matches, which is very good. And now we want to see how is this property matching up from an amenities, backyard, how modern or unmodern it is, and make sure they are similar. Okay. When you click this little button, by the way, at the top, it's going to take you to an Airbnb listing. So it takes us to that Airbnb listing, and let's look through the photos. Okay. So, all right. And we're going to compare it with the inside of the property that we're looking at. So ours is pretty nicely renovated inside. It's pretty modern, nice kitchen, nice bathrooms all across the board. It's a pretty nice place. Okay. Nice backyard. They've got a nice patio, turf. So it's not the biggest backyard, but there's things we could work on. We could work with. There's a pool in the neighborhood. They're showing in their neighborhood. Okay. Now let's take a look at the property that we saw on Airbnb that we're comparing it to. You want to compare, once we got the bedrooms and bathrooms out of the way, how nice it is. So they seem pretty similar. This property's got nice photography, nicely put together with the furniture. Okay. They've got their games. Let's see what else they've got. Nice kitchen. In general, I would say pretty similar to the property that, we're looking at and how nice the inside of the home is. Okay. So amenities are huge in 2025. Okay. So this is something we really need to pay attention to. Do they have amenities that would have to be purchased with a house? For example, do they have a pool? In that case, I'd have to make sure I'm getting a house that has a pool. We don't really want to go build a pool. So there's no pool here, I don't see. What are the amenities? Okay, they have a nice putting green. We have turf, so we could add a putting green. They have a patio, okay. They have a golf simulator. All right, we could add a golf simulator. That's something we could work with. So I would say these properties are very similar. So at a high level, I would use this as a comp, meaning I think the properties are pretty similar from a glance. Again, when we're doing this analysis, we are going to do this over and over and over for several properties. But I just want to give you an example, right? But so far, so good, because if our property is 70,000 in expenses a year, if we're coming close to generating 149,000, 150, even 125, 130, 40, anything above the 70, 71,000 in expenses is profit for us. So I would say this could be a good opportunity. We might have found us a property. But again, not just off of one single comp. Keep that in mind. So we're going to go back and we're going to continue looking around here. So we have this 31. What is this 31K? This is not down the street. This is a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom. Okay. Let's see if it's similar. Okay, the photos are really bad. All right, so this is it's an older property. They have a decent backyard, but this house does not look like the property that we're looking at. It's a 4-bedroom. We have one more bedroom than it. We have one more bathroom. This is only a 2-bath. So this would not be a comp, but I would, in general, if I was looking to purchase this property, I would want to see more comps. I would want to see more comps than just one doing 35,000 that's not like our property, and one that is similar to our property doing 150,000. So I did see another comp here. So what is this? This is VRBO, by the way. This property's on Verbo. Look what we found. This is just the VRBO listing, so it's actually the same house. So you always want to double check. And again, this is why you want to do really thorough research. We've got some up north doing 200K, and they're a bit further. But again, this is a good sign for us, because while these could be in a different neighborhood, in general, I like seeing these numbers because we have a 5-bedroom. They only have a 4-bedroom. And bedroom count really matters in short-term rentals. But this is where I would want to see properties. And ideally, I'd want to see comps in this neighborhood. Okay? So remember, we've got the filters on, so we're only seeing anything close to what our property is doing from a bedroom and bathroom count. I would say this is a good comp. But again, when it comes to doing research and before pulling the trigger, you want to check on whether there's an HOA. Maybe that's why there aren't other properties here in the exact neighborhood. And we do want to see more comps in this general area before we want to move forward with the property. Okay, but I hope you understand the process. We would do this extensively. So to recap, I would always make sure that there are more comps than just 1 or 2 different comps, because these are actually the same property. I would want to see more properties that somewhat fare against the property that I'm looking at and see how comparable they are. Run the numbers, of course, in much more detail. And I wanted to at least share with you, this is the general process and framework that I follow. Remembering the filters, making sure you're looking at full-time properties, and always getting several properties, okay? Then you can add what's called customize a comp set, where you will go and add different properties to your comp set, and it's going to create a list of what your comparable properties are. That's something that I want you to also do. And again, I know we want to keep this video not too long, but that's one of the things that I do when I'm using AirDNA, is pulling in all the properties that I can compare to the one that I am looking at. All right. So I hope you got the gist of the process. I want to make sure that all of these filters and the framework of what I just walked you through this entire process are what you were able to take away from this video. And if you're interested in learning how to start your Airbnb business from scratch, click the link in the description. I have a completely free course that you can watch that walks you through the entire process from start to finish. And for those of you that are more serious about starting your Airbnb business and would like to work together on a one-on-one basis, I work with a handful of students every single month. You can click the link in the description, apply to see if you qualify to work with me. And if you're eligible, I'll be reaching out to you. Okay? So that's part of your research right there. It's all part of your research before you go invest in a property, regardless of the type of method you're doing with Airbnb, whether it's arbitrage or purchasing, or there's also co-hosting. That's what I want you to focus on, because your success is going to come from how good your property is. That is the whole game this year. All right. So what I want to talk about are a couple different ways you can do Airbnb. All right. Number one, let's talk about rental arbitrage first, which is for typically if you don't have that much capital to start. Rental arbitrage is a great way to start on Airbnb. All the other principles for market research apply when you're either buying or doing rental arbitrage. And there's another option, which I'll talk about as a bonus in just a few minutes here. But I want to talk about, what is Airbnb rental arbitrage? Airbnb rental arbitrage is when you approach a landlord, you find a property that's listed on, Zillow, Realtor.com, anywhere online, and you approach the landlord and you say, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I have a corporate leasing company. And essentially what you're doing is locking in a 12, 18, 24-month lease. And then with the landlord's permission, you are relisting that property on Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, get those bookings, and then you're generating your revenue. So, for example, let me tell you how this works. Let's say you find a property for $3,000 a month, right? $3,000. Let me use another marker. 3,000, right? So your rent is 3K. Let's say you've got another $500 in utilities, right? So all your expenses, internet, landscaping, let's say you have a pool, let's call it another, let's just call it another $500 in expenses. So all in, you're at $4,000 a month, per month. Then you go list it on Airbnb, and once you've done the proper research and you've got all the amenities and you've got the right property and you've done the rest of the steps that we're going to talk about, that property could be generating, let's say, $8,000 a month on average, right? I'm making these numbers up as we go to give you the idea. So after, simple math here, right? After your expenses, you're left with $4,000 a month in profit. You don't own the property. You didn't have to put much down. Now, let me tell you the costs of what it typically costs to get into Airbnb rental arbitrage. But right out the gate, you're looking at your rent, your utilities, landscaping fee, maybe a pool maintenance person, and let's call it 4K. But then you're left with whatever difference you make is your profit, okay? You don't have to, now what are the pros of this? You don't have to go buy a house. You have less risk because you don't own the property. And it's a great way to build cash flow, start out, learn the ropes of Airbnb, and once you accumulate all of that experience and you accumulate all the cash, then you can go out and become an actual property owner and list those on Airbnb and rent those out as well. So what does it typically cost to start on rental arbitrage? So with rental arbitrage, you typically have to put, since you're getting a longer term lease, you need the security deposit, which I also teach you how to negotiate so that you can actually get a couple of weeks, even a month of free rent. Yes, it's possible. And what you do need is funds for furnishing the property and getting the property ready. So depending on where you are, what city, how big the property is, on average, my students are looking at anywhere from 10, so let's say $15,000 to start, okay? 10 to 15K. Just, yeah. 10 to 15K in furniture. This is for 3-bed to 4-bed, 2 to 3 baths, right? And of course, if you have an outdoor, you're furnishing the outside. But all of this is done online. You order all of that, all that furniture online. You can look at Amazon is a great place, especially when you're just starting out. You don't need to be fancy. You really don't need to be fancy with all the furniture, because what is important is your design. I'm going to get into this in the future, but let's just talk about startup costs. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Amazon, furniture, Wayfair, we'll come back to these. Some great places to just start out. And then later, if you're in a more luxury market, maybe you can order some nicer pieces from other places. But really you want quality, not anything too expensive, because you can have quality without paying too much money. So this is your startup costs, all right? And then, I know you have to get your LLC, which costs a couple $100, right? LegalZoom. So you've got your furniture. Let me just write this again. Startup costs are costs. You have your furniture, which is, let's call it 10,000 to 15,000, right? And your LLC, which is a couple $100, which you can just use LegalZoom or any one of these online services, and you can just lock in your LLC, and that makes you a professional and legal business, which also allows you to look more professional in the eyes of all the landlords, and it protects you legally as you're conducting business. So these are the startup costs for rental arbitrage. Now, you can even save a lot of money here if the property comes furnished. A lot of people are renting their properties already furnished, and all you'll have to do is come in and maybe you can enhance the furniture or add some amenities, and then you can really slash this cost even more. So that's kind of a hack, but the furniture has to be pretty good and it has to match. There has to be a nice vibe when you're looking. So part of your research, by the way, when you're selecting properties is you want to make sure that your property is at least as nice or nicer than the surrounding properties on Airbnb. So you're also going to do that research on AirDNA, as I mentioned earlier, and you're going to go on Airbnb.com to the area where you're looking at properties and compare the properties that are doing the best. Okay? And what do I mean by properties doing the best? So on top of AirDNA showing you certain gross numbers and all the metrics that they have, you're personally going to go to Airbnb.com, find properties in your area, and you're going to see how booked are the calendars. Okay, and so you can get an idea. So just comparatively, if you look at one property and it's booked, quite well in advance, then they're doing something right. And you want to look at what exactly type of furniture and amenities they have and what the demographic is that goes there. For example, if your area is known for golf tournaments or tennis tournaments, maybe you want let's stick to the golf, right? You want a little mini golf range or a little putt-putt or a driving range. So for example, a couple of my properties are in some golfing areas. So I have a mini driving range and a putt-putt over in the side of the house in the yard, and people love that. So golfers come and they just, they're in the yard hitting the balls and they book the property just for that. So you want to know your demographic as part of the research that you're doing. So this is all part of step number 1. Okay, so this is the startup cost for Arbitrage. And what I also want to talk a little bit about, there is a third bonus opportunity in Airbnb that I'm going to get into. But the second thing I want to talk about, which is really important if you're trying to buy a property. So why would you want to buy an Airbnb? There's many, many reasons you want to buy an Airbnb in 2025. And there's a lot of pros. Let's talk about the pros and then the cons. You need more startup capital than you do for rental arbitrage when you're buying typically, right? Because you have to go buy the house. You have to put a down payment down. So typically, you're looking at least a 10, 15, 20% down payment. Usually it's a 20% down payment if you're going through the banks. But what I mentioned in the beginning of this video is there are ways using creative finance strategies to buy a property even for between 3 and 5% rates. Yes, in 2025. Now you might be asking, how do you do that? There is something called subject to, and let's go right into this, right? Subject to, when you buy a property subject to, you're buying it subject to the existing loan. So for example, let's say in today's, you go to the bank, let's do a quick comparison. You want to buy, let's keep the numbers very simple. Let's say $500K for the house. If you go to the bank, you're going to need typically 20% down, which is, in this case, $100,000. Not everyone has $100,000 laying around, right? Now, and you have to get qualified, right? You have to have the money down, and you have to, go to the bank, go through the whole qualification process. You need to have your credit score intact so that you could get an interest rate that is not going to destroy you. And in 2025, rates are what? Rates are between 6, 7, pretty much between 6 and 8%. And if you go to an investment loan, it's even higher right now. Okay? So how do we get around this? There's something called subject to. So if you buy a property subject to the existing loan, and that loan was acquired a few years ago where interest rates were extremely low, 2.85 to 5%, and I'm going to show you how to find these properties, you can purchase the property subject to that loan. So the property transfers over to you, title and all that, and the loan, the note, stays in the previous owner's name, and you're making payments on that behalf. So that's how you can end up getting a property for 2.85% rate to between there and 5%. So I just not too long ago purchased one of my best performing Airbnbs, and the rate was 4.75. Whereas when I went to the bank was telling me the best rate at the time was 8.5%, 9% for an investment loan, which was crazy, and that would have completely destroyed the deal. Now, why would that have destroyed the deal? So for example, let's say, and again, I don't have a calculator in front of me, so bear with me. You know what? Maybe I'll just use a calculator just so that you can get an idea. So if you're looking at, there's a huge difference in what you can save if you go with the bank and get a, let's call it a 7.5% rate. You're going to have a much higher payment than if you got it for, let's say, 4.75 rate. Okay, so if we take a look, 7.5 rate for a 20% down on a 500K, you're looking at about $3,300 per month of a mortgage. Whereas if you do something at 4.5% for a 500K down prop, or a property at $500,000, a 4.75 rate, you're pretty much looking at about $2,300. So look how much you're saving, $1,000, which is about 30%. Okay, so that's all going to give you much more room to make a deal actually make sense versus not. And that is the power of purchasing a property subject to. Now, you can also negotiate with the seller, and you can also do seller financing. So many different strategies that you can do in 2025 to make Airbnb worth it as an acquisition as well. All right, so that cash flow that you're going to be able to keep back in your pocket is very important to make a deal make sense. So back to basically my example, it was basically I got half the interest rate. Now do the math on that. Half the interest rate because I purchased property subject to, and I didn't have to go to the bank at the time where rates were really, really at their peak. And that's what made this property very profitable and a great investment, at least even on the cash flow side. All right. Then there's also the equity gain, which is how you build wealth. You build wealth in real estate via the equity gained. All right. And then lastly, one could argue one of the most important reasons is the tax benefits. Okay. So there's something called the short-term rental loophole where you can accelerate depreciation. And then especially if you have a W-2, if you're a W-2 earner, you can go purchase a property. I'm not a CPA, so you could talk to your CPA or your tax strategist about this. But then you can write off that property's accelerated depreciation, and then you're going to save a huge tax bill. And that's a massive advantage when you're purchasing property. So keep this in mind. And then the way you're going to find these properties, there's certain criteria when you're looking for a property and buying it subject to. And typically it's when the listing has been sitting for quite a while. Properties that have been purchased between 2020 and 2022, because really low interest rates were locked in back then. And that is exactly how you can really snipe some great deals. And a software that can help you do that, a tool, if you go to PropStream, you can see, and also you're gonna go to your realtor and have them talk to other agents, and they can help you understand what rate they locked in and what the existing details are on a certain mortgage. They're going to talk to the owner of the property and see if they're open to doing a subject to transaction. And the longer the listing has been listed, the seller will be more motivated and interested and willing to figure out a deal that's outside of the bank and even do seller financing and give you alternative options, which you can also negotiate the property's down payment. So you can figure out a lot of concessions, especially in this market, and make sure that it's a win-win for both you and the seller. PropStream PropStream.com lets you look up and filter properties all across the country at very granular levels of detail. It goes Zillow, Realtor.com. You can also search these properties and how long they've been listed. You want to find anything that's been listed for typically more than 60 to 90 days. Put those filters in Zillow, Realtor, and especially PropStream, and then you'll find all the properties with the sellers had it listed there for quite a while. He or she is going to be more open to negotiating and alternative methods to sell their property. So Great way to get a great property in 2025. And this will make or break the difference between a property being a good deal or not being a good deal. Okay, so on that point, a lot of the reason people are saying Airbnb died previously is because the rates shot up so high that you could no longer buy a property through the bank and it have enough meat on the bone left to justify the deal being good. It took up so much of those profits. But if you're able to bypass that by doing something like this, you have a great deal on your hands when you find that type of property. Okay, so that is purchasing a property. And I love helping my students negotiate those deals because it's all in negotiation, making a property, only investing in a property that makes sense. You have to make sure the property and the numbers make sense. So one of the first things I do when I work with people one-on-one is give them my deal analyzer. I give them all of those components that I look at. They just plug it away, and then we can analyze the deal and say, hey, does it make sense to purchase this property? We take in all the metrics from AirDNA, we do all the research on Airbnb, and then we plug in all the numbers and see what kind of cash on cash return we can get if we were to invest in that property. And from there, you know how to negotiate. And this is what I love helping my students with, is how to negotiate a deal that is a winner for you and also a winner for the seller. All right. So a third bonus strategy, it's one that you can start for literally $0. You can do what is called co-hosting. Okay, so this is a bonus. Co-hosting is essentially where you do not rent the property, you do not own the property. What you go do is you go to Zillow or Realtor or any of these websites that list properties, and you find listings where a landlord has already put their property up for rent. And again, you kind of want to find, it's a little easier if you find properties that have been listed and have not been rented out for quite a while. You contact the landlord, and you're going to do all the property management, which you'll obviously automate as well as you scale out, but you're going to list that property on Airbnb, VRBO, you handle all the cleanings, and remember, they're not rented out now. So they're actually listening how you can solve that problem for them because they're bleeding money every month by not having their property rented. You're going to take over that property, get it in ready shape for all these platforms, manage all of that. So let's say you find a property and it's listed for $5,000 a month. It's got great amenities. And again, no matter what strategy you use, you're going to follow all of step one, the market research. All of that still applies. So you find the property listed for $5K and the owner agrees with you on the whole concept of co-hosting, which you're going to explain to them. There's a very particular way to do that. And you're going to just take a cut. So between 15 and up to 30% of whatever you generate. So let's say you're able to make $10,000 a month on that property on Airbnb. If you charge, let's just go with the middle, 20%, you just made $2,000 for doing what? Listing the property on all the platforms, managing and handling the cleanings, which you're going to automate and you're going to hire a virtual assistant, and taking care of the property, getting the listings done, photography done right, and just preparing it with the rest of the steps I'm going to share with you in this training. And you're just going to collect, you're basically a property manager and you're collecting no matter what they generate, you're taking your percentage of that revenue. All right. So a great model if you're starting out, and all you need is your LLC, again, which is, let's call it about $200 to start. Okay. And eventually, again, the goal, and I want to emphasize this, and this is what I share with everyone I work with, eventually you do want to become a property owner or a real estate investor where you own the properties, because then you get the tax advantages and the equity gain. Okay, so you've done your market research. And now we're on the next step. Okay, so whether you've done rental arbitrage, you've purchased your property, or you're doing co-hosting. And I really want to focus on the arbitrage and the purchasing of the properties. But regardless, these steps apply throughout the rest of the process. The next thing you want to do, step number 2, is furnishing and designing the property, okay? So you do not need to be a designer. You don't need to have the fanciest, most expensive furniture, but what you want to do is make sure that your property is at least as nice or a little bit nicer when it comes to the furnishing and design as the properties that are winning in your market. So that ties into step number one, the market research. But when it comes to furnishing, you don't need to spend, especially when you're starting off, too much money. All you need to do is, for finding the design, go to Pinterest or look at the listings in Airbnb that are doing the best and are the most booked, so you can see it from the calendar, and see how they are designing their properties and make yours at least the same or a little bit better. Okay, I was not a designer. My girlfriend actually does interior design and has a really good eye for that, so she helped a lot for my properties. But again, some of the properties that I purchased came furnished, and then I just added some nice pieces to them. So back to Pinterest. Pinterest, you can draw so much inspiration from different type of bedrooms, different type of living rooms, layouts, and you're just going to type in, let's say you have a more modern or contemporary, or you have like a mid-century type of home. You're going to just type that in and type in living room, mid-century living room, and then see what it comes out with. And then you're going to just pull in that furniture into your own design. And where are you going to find that furniture? You're going to look at, very simple, Amazon and Wayfair. You can find some great pieces here. And what I tell everyone that I work with is you do not need to have the most expensive furniture. You just have to have nice furniture. It looks nice, but you don't have to break the bank trying to find and buy the most expensive pieces, especially when you're starting out. I certainly did not do that. So all you've got to do, draw that inspiration, order everything on Amazon, on Wayfair, because really it comes into the design and having a property that's at least as nice, if not a little bit nicer, which feeds into your research, the market research. So you already know what's going to work and what isn't. And always look at Pinterest, look at Amazon, Wayfair, and of course, Airbnb listings that are winning. Get a better marker here. So this is step number two. Make sure that you're not overspending, but you definitely don't want to underspend. Okay? So that covers furnishing and designing the property. Number three, once you've furnished the property, once you've designed the property, what you're going to do is make sure it's very staged, nicely put together, which brings me to number three, which is your photography. All right? Photography. Photography is, and this is what I tell everybody, do not try to underspend or cheap out when it comes to your photographers. This is the most important piece of marketing. Number one important step in marketing your property. Okay? Because your photos are how you sell your property on any of the listings. They're going to carry on to Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking, and that is what's going to make someone stop, click, compare you to anybody else, and move forward with yours. So you want to have extremely great photos. Now, where do you find a good photographer? You can go to Thumbtack. Is a great place. You can find photographers and freelance workers. Upwork. Fiverr. Okay? And make sure you request the book of business of every photographer that you speak with. So ask for maybe 3, 4, or 5 photographers, and whoever can give you the best quality of work. They've done real estate photography and they've done Airbnb photography. Look at all their work, look at their listing images, the images that they've provided to you in their book of business, and whoever has the best quality is who you're going to move forward with. And when it comes to, they're going to know this, when it comes to your actual photos, you're going to want 2 types of photos. You're going to want both daytime and twilight. So what's twilight? Twilight photos are right before the sunset, and you can get some amazing photos. It's actually a great type of photo to get as your main image. Right as the sun is setting, you can capture in your photos, by the way, whether it's daytime or twilight, your hero image, which is going to have as much of the amenities and the best angle and the best shot of your house. So if you have a backyard with a pool and a spa, you want to get an angle, and your photographer will know this and help you with it. And you capture all of the best elements of your property with that hero photo, because that's going to be your main image. Okay, they're going to take daytime photos of inside and outside, twilight photos of inside and outside, and these come out looking great. And not everybody has twilight, but the competition has stepped up. So a lot of properties are starting to get twilight images and have started getting twilight images. And I can tell you most certainly, any listing that is crushing it in your area, I'm positive would have twilight photos. They just look great, and you're going to need both of these. Another thing you can do is drone photos if you have a nice backyard. All right, so that covers photography, which leads me to my next step, which is actually hiring your staff. Now, you could do this step concurrently and at the same time as the previous one, where you are getting the most important team member, which is your cleaner or cleaners. Your cleaners are effectively your property managers. So you want to make sure that you are vetting them out and making sure that they do a phenomenal job, because they pretty much run your whole Airbnb operation. So the cleaners, you can also find them on Thumbtack or Fiverr, Upwork. Okay? And they need to have done Airbnb cleanings, especially when you're hiring them. You need to make sure, if you chat with 3-4 different companies or individuals on any of these websites or apps, make sure that they've done Airbnb cleanings before. Very, very important, because the detail that goes into thoroughly cleaning at a professional level an Airbnb and preparing it after every guest has left for the next guest is so crucial to giving that sense of cleanliness and making sure that your guests that do come in can immediately tell, wow, this place is managed and run professionally. Okay, this will make or break the difference between you getting 5-star reviews or 4, 3, 2, 1-star reviews, which you never want. Okay, so we both know the idea where we walk into a hotel or an Airbnb and you find a hair, and that just paints a negative picture for the rest of your stay. You do not want to have to deal with that, and you certainly don't want your Airbnb or reviews to reflect that, excuse me. So the next thing also, you've got your cleaners, is if you've done this correctly, you want to have a pool. So typically a pool in the spa, you're going to need a pool maintenance person. And if you have a backyard, front yard, any sort of lawn, you're going to need a landscaper. Okay? So really important with your cleaners can actually also help you stage your property and prepare it for a previous step, which is number 3. So that's why I was saying you don't have to do step 4 and 3 separately. And then also make sure your pool maintenance and landscapers were at your property right before your photographers on photo day, so that logistically all of that is coordinated and you have the property in the cleanest, most prepared state, ready for your photos to be as good as they possibly can, because that is going to be how your property is represented. So these are the most important hires that you're going to make in your Airbnb business. All right. Okay. So once you've hired your staff, next is automation. Which are your tools, softwares. So you got into Airbnb for generating as much of a passive income as you possibly can. Airbnb is semi-passive, and the tools are going to help you automate all of that. And the most important tools, in my opinion, that I first get my students onto is your pricing Pricing software. So what does pricing software do? Pricing software, and by the way, do not use Airbnb's smart pricing. Please, you will leave a lot of money on the table, and I would not recommend it. I would recommend Price Labs or Beyond Pricing. I've used both. And what these tools do is they're going to automatically understand and know in the market how much your Airbnb should be priced at. They know what all your competitors are priced at, and they understand through their data what events are going on in your area and the seasonality. So you don't have to manually do that. But for example, if there's a big event in your area, they're automatically going to increase the pricing so that you can get top dollar. You don't want to leave any money on the table, right? We're running a business and we want it to be as profitable as possible. So these tools are going to help make sure that your property is priced correctly and automate all of that adjusted pricing for you so that you don't have to do it manually. The next tool is your listing management software, which is going to be Hospitable. So what does Hospitable do? Hospitable has multiple purposes. It centralizes all of your listings. So if you have multiple listings across multiple platforms, even if you have one listing across multiple platforms, it's going to centralize all of that. It's going to track all of your revenue. It's going to centralize all the communications. It's going to automate those communications. For instance, when someone is checking in or checking out, automatic messages. If someone inquires about your property, there's going to be an automated message that goes out to them. All of that is done through Hospitable. It also, like I mentioned, tracks all of your revenue, and it's something that you can hand off eventually once you scale to your virtual assistant, and they can manage all of your listings, communications through Hospitable so that you don't have to do that manually. It's a huge game changer, and it's going to save you a bunch of time. So these are the two main softwares. Now there's plenty of other softwares, especially as you start to scale, that you can use. There's certain softwares that help you automate your cleanings and notify your cleaners. All of that, in my opinion, you can do once you have a bigger operation. But once you're starting out, when you scale out beyond 2-3 properties, then you can start really gaining the value out of those. This is more than enough for you to run and manage your property, okay? Especially starting out. All right, so once you've automated all of this, now it's time to go live. And that brings me to getting your first booking in 24 to 48 hours. So here's where all of your hard work pays off. And if you've followed all of these steps, step by step, this is the most exciting part. I remember when I got my very first booking, it was a complete game changer and motivated me to work harder and continue scaling. So this is what you're going to experience if you follow all of these steps, step by step.